Abuse is an arms race. It is a two-edged sword of Damocles, wrapped arboristiquely around an anti-each triple entendre deployed during a Mexican standoff in the hall of mirrors of a domestic abuse shelter. Yet despite the false logics and faulty statistics, even though these facts were constantly overlooked or incorrectly cited by social media outrage campaigns, one thing was always true, and it was the final piece of evidence I needed. That all three women, Jilly Cooper, Letitia Harroch, and Lucy May Alcott, who went on trial for assaulting their abusive spouses, did so against the law. At least one of these three women could have pressed charges, but they did not, for reasons known only to them. This meant that those charges might still be enforced. Now I wanted to know what the real issue was behind this fight that so many of the people on Twitter found so impossible to comprehend. Why were three otherwise smart and responsible women, including a political scientist, a musician, and a female police chief, apparently happy to condemn each other to the status of aggressor in a war game designed and marketed as seriously unfair? Why were these otherwise bright, sane, educated women apparently unable to consider what it means when two wrongs don't make a right, especially when their very safety is at stake? Why were they unable to empathize with a fellow woman who, for unknown reasons, didn't have a safety net beneath her as she was pulled down into a hopelessly one-sided engagement with no hope of exit? And moreover, how is it that one could fight against oneself and win using one's intelligence, political status, or natural authority in the most classic examples of logic sinking evidence, data, common sense, and yet one could also fight against oneself with inside information that just proved how ludicrous it is to doubt one's own divinity or virility, yet be winning by the terms of this debate? I understood enough of the online echo chamber and its heuristics and vices to recognize the implicit explanation as soon as it popped up on a news site when the dismissal was instead being directed at others. It meant it wasn't an acceptable, and yet this time it seemed I would have to appeal to something beyond mere virtue and whatever might have passed for internal orthodoxy as regards to feminism or #MeToo. I recognized that there was one further assumption about violence that still needed to be faced. The only place these people could confront someone from their tribe much as one would approach an unpleasant school friend, like Helen Gitner, was not inside one's mind, not via their own deliberations, but in a battlefield of online engagement, the public square, where a liberal social climate meant one was well protected by all those witnesses who also happened to be judges and policemen and public officials and mothers. And I hope, but with misgiving, that none of the things I needed to talk about could easily be exposed and spoiled in that harsh and bright light of social media. After all, for me there had already been another great abyss to be crossed, and I wasn't alone. An international fraternity of others who had found themselves in such places, who were made to doubt the most important of assumptions, that of the truth's survival in the realm of the occult and its association with the story forms we might use to examine, acknowledge, or apologize for anything human, no matter how holy it may seem, whether as a sacrament or as the house of a temple. In this darkness we needed one another's testimony, not that of any noble phantasm, as we all know. You don't find absolution, only ever encounter, so all that was left for us was to rely upon the concrete acts of confession and redemption enacted upon those truths we'd proved beyond doubt by our own deeds, our own free will and fear. In any case, I figured the public might have been feeling this pressure since the summer, when a scandal that looked like a Spanish farce began to bleed into a national dialogue and spread worldwide. The long and short of the story of Ibiza was that three well-connected Spanish people began an international tempest, one that came back around in some surprising places, not because it had anything to do with our current post-Gnostic crisis, but simply because these three were facing contemporary cultural taboos. Each was involved with another young person, an artist, or a DJ. They'd been enjoying their Friday night fling under the unicorn flirting watch of an infallible witness. They'd got up the moment. In short, their Saturday had begun in ecstasy, since these people are from Ibiza or perhaps wherever it was they liked to fuck. These three, as they became four, and then six and seven and more, ended up as usual in such cases outside. One was getting very drunk, which meant jumping all around. There was no question that one of them was someone very like her, for people didn't turn out and gasp to watch a difference. Merely an identitas had done this several times that week, that night, or in some more extreme versions of herself. After all, one would always turn up drunk, since drinking was as essential a function of human beings as breathing. At some point in her Friday flirtation, her behavior, I imagined she had become sexually harassed, led astray, if you like, and possibly even her increasingly entropic form, even if she never called him anything worse than a little shit, was declared inappropriate by a human with some power over the group. Then all this lovely fireball that we were attempting to muster turned up out of the dark waves, crashing and rearing on rocks, and apologized, fangs showing to avoid their own pearl in ecstasy, only to find herself huddled somewhere and squeezed for this perceived mistake by someone, whether it was in an Ibiza brothel, or that guy whose friend just took it all down from a 16-pound rock on the top of an open source party very popular these days, and that was the moment of the split is spilt, also to rhyme with spit, like blood from a nose. Each one went looking for her original identity, but they found versions of themselves. Even others were warring within these particular others, since whatever it was these three people found themselves into, they had spent a week arguing and killing the parts of their mind that came after and questioned the struggle. Perhaps they were down single, being married in the sexual matrix and environment that could provide an extremely believable form of life. I've tried it out in Ibiza several times, but only by suppressing those who tell a better tale, the poet and the erotic scholar, and all the parts of a body that serve a function other than pure mad fucking. These spouts and the shocks of a sexual democracy never approved of this act of bodily baptism. But one or the other, it is not known who took whose side, just wanted to pick and choose one's version of truth, one's conception of beauty and danger, one's emotional experience, one's bodily autonomy. One could have opted out. Someone wanted to hold her in check or soothe her and force the decision about their moral discourse. And not all these lovely flames were fun and in good company. It is unlikely that a majority voted. In any case, one moment all of their deepest assumptions of tolerance and shared worth collapsed, and for 2 days all around the globe these people began to disengage from one another, both through individual and on occasion corporate reactions to these strange news events, and from the rearguard defense of old positions, those of the strong women, those of the club kids. They felt their vision of a sort of Thelema, but of what might happen once you get out of bed and explore some version of this chaotic human potential collapse into dust. Their psyche, and especially those parts that had made them human at all, especially the parts of itself that had once wanted to live outside these simplicities. That would be when a revolution against oneself begins. And yet all that happened apart from this public penance for having overstepped their taboos was the matter of how those people handled the sad news. Where are the things they gave their word about, some sort of aesthetic equality and justice? One didn't turn up with a dog whistle and threaten a scary siren from an African prince. Instead, they entered into a book full of hairless monkeys, sometimes faking being an angel who do everything exactly as they were told to. Thus, I assume, seeing this, that we still want to protect ourselves against the heart's terror and confusion. It feels so cruel and wrong. These are the reasons I told my ex to lose his address. This is where people search for another face. A bit like how humans keep talking about sex with no one and anyone, how they could watch everyone come but no one be present for them, or how they are for everybody except for the one. Yet most of us haven't mastered this contradiction. Might there not be a special hand in heaven waiting to feed this cry of dissatisfaction, always shorn and without any source of contact or provision for love, like one who begs without being loved? But why don't we wait for the first sign instead of fighting with these problems? These are not people you can argue with. Then again, arguing with us, those who keep giving your faces to ourselves, might also be a way to never trust in God, just as no one else has this perfect dialogue with someone they think is made of lies. That would be where your true enemies would all emerge. Those who imagine them as essential and tragic parts of reality, as it happens another ironic disappointment if I understand your faces and those parts of it which lie beneath all other sights. But this was what was finally unraveling at Ibiza as their perspectives dissolved and inverted and dissolved again. What was real in those three souls came crashing down. All that is left is your illusions, and even now there might be something up your sleeve too, if it makes you happy, along with this handful of soot from your dreams. And that was their folly. Which of these really belongs to the devil? When faced with any impossibility, even as we jump and swim or dress in various white sheets at our first meeting, we will always grab the hand for all his faithfulness. Just like our childish flirtation with love in Ibiza, a beautiful experience in so many ways, yet as painful as an unwarranted quickie after hours with a boy at some bar. If we just weren't married already and are carrying someone else's baby, perhaps our friend's child, they always remain alive within us. If we were single or needed a perfect sex life and perfect children to tell ourselves we weren't gay.